I first heard about DC20 from Chipmunk's video on it. Immediately his enthusiasm made me want to check out the Dungeon Coach's channel, and after watching some of the coach's videos I got more and more intrigued, especially when I watched the video where he talked about the classes. I loved hearing his ideas. I was especially interested in the classes that aren't in 5e, like the Warlord, Scion, and Cursed. Well, the Warlord slash Commander class is neat. But really, I'm fine with the Curse class being removed as long as we get Werewolf options or whatever in the future to replace it, which we know that eventually will. And for the Scion, I am a bit disappointed that's not part of the core book. The coach's video on the Scion was one of the first DC20 videos that I had watched, and I was very interested by it. Though when it was announced that Psionics are sold separately, I wasn't too enthusiastic about that. I absolutely get why the DC20 magazine exists, and I know it's going to be in the future book anyway, but I wish Psionics were free to the people, or at least Kickstarter backers, or at least me specifically. But regardless, I was/am still excited for DC20. I went from, this is pretty neat, to, it'd be cool if I played this someday, all the way to, I'm gonna watch every past DC20 livestream, support the Kickstarter, and then force my friends to play it with me. They're gonna like DC20 whether they like it or not. But it's not perfect, and I'm gonna talk about some issues I have with it. Most of these issues have been mentioned by other people before, and none of my issues are all too serious. I haven't found some crazy fundamental flaw with the system. I'll leave that to the math enjoyers to find and discuss. This is more just niche stuff that I'd like to be adjusted or changed before DC20 releases. So, starting with the opinion I feel the most strongly about, which I know for a fact the coach is aware of, so thankfully this will likely be outdated soon, but right now I strongly prefer the 5th edition fighter over the DC20 fighter. The DC20 fighter feels limited in the types of characters you can make with it due to adaptive arsenal. In 5e, you can make a solid argument that Mihawk, Laios, me with my iconic punching attacks, Tanjiro, and Mizu would all be fighters. But in DC20 I'm not so sure it fits, since these characters usually fight using only a single weapon. Meanwhile, the DC20 fighter is a master of all weapons, and encourages you to use and switch between multiple. Adaptive Arsenal's quick swap makes so you're objectively making yourself weaker by not carrying a wide variety of weapons on you. I know you could just choose to never use quick swap, but psychologically I can't do that. It feels so bad. The simplest solution is probably just to make quick swap a choice at level 1. Even if it's mundane, like you can choose between a skill point or a quick swap, I'd still like that because then I could at least sorta justify it to myself. Although ideally, it'd be more interesting than that. Another thing I'm not super keen on with the fighter and in general is the lack of support for unarmed strikes. I know the fighter is a master of weapons, but your body is a weapon, and I don't think it steps on the toes of the monk since the monk has access to weapons too. The monk's identity isn't exclusively tied to unarmed strikes. Plus, monk leans heavily into the flavor of being a monk, so I think there's design space available for an unarmed fighter. I also want unarmed strike support for the Spellblade. I believe it's been more or less denied aside of potentially being a future subclass, but I'd love it as an option built into the class. I know rules is written you can just take the Iron Palm feature from Monk and then be an unarmed strike Spellblade at level 2, but I doubt it's intended. Also raw, if you're Warlock with Iron Palm, you can make your unarmed strikes into a packed weapon and then teleport yourself into a pocket dimension. Raw, you can also throw your unarmed strikes with Iron Palm. Iron Palm is just weird, and I wouldn't expect a GM to allow any of the stuff I just mentioned. So proper support for an unarmed Spellblade would be nice. And finally, I want other forms of unarmed strike to be viable outside of punching and slapping. Dual wielding only works with your hands, so if your hands are free and you want to make an unarmed strike, then you're objectively making yourself worse if you decide to kick or do anything that doesn't involve your hands. Even with features like natural weapons, if you don't have to be something on your hands such as claws, then you're nerfing yourself for no reason. I'm sure a lot of GMs will be lenient and allow you to dual wield your legs as long as your hands are empty, but with the current rules I cannot justify playing as Sanji, and that's a tragedy. But moving on from my desire to be Sanji and on to other class features, starting with Wizard. I don't know how to feel about wizards having sigils as a base part of their class. There are very few wizards in fiction that use sigils, so every wizard using them feels odd to me. Although I do find sigils to be really cool, and they do give wizards a bit more identity, so I'm not going to be too upset if they remain as is. However, I think replacing them with something else and just having there be like a subclass dedicated to sigils is worth considering. And another class with a feature I'm unsure about is the Commander. As a whole, I love the class. If I could have added any class to 5e, it probably would have been a commander, so I think it's super neat that DC20 has one. However, I strongly dislike the veteran flavor feature. If you want to play a commander that's a coach, a motivational speaker, a non-magical bard, a manager, or just some inspiring guy, you can still technically do that, but the veteran feature makes it feel like your character has to be a literal veteran. Or at the very least, you're gonna have to justify why your character would be familiar with military organizations, which feels restrictive to me. The commander is the only class with a flavor feature that I outright dislike, but I think Rogue also has a similar problem, since Thieves' Camp might not make sense for certain characters. So here's some solutions I thought of. For veteran, I think it should be replaced with something else entirely. Maybe a feature where you can choose a knowledge skill to gain advantage with. I don't know. But for Thieves' Cant, I think the solution is pretty straightforward. I just want the Thieves' Cant to be optional, so you could choose between gaining Thieves' Cant or gaining another language of your choice. The Thieves' Cant flavor feature already makes you fluent in another mortal language of your choice, so just make it so you can optionally replace Thieves' Cant with another mortal language of your choice. Simple. Now for ancestries. Immediately I want to say that this is my favorite ancestry / race system I've seen. I love all the choices you get at level 1. Plus you can choose between 2 ancestries for either mechanical or flavor purposes, which I love. So you could mechanically be half human, half giantborn, but from a flavor perspective, you could just be a human that's really swole like Colonel Sanders. Or you could be a half human, half beastborn, and be a cat girl both mechanically and from a flavor perspective. Or you could be a deer. Or a snake woman! Although like with any fantasy race system, some people are gonna have issues with it due to them not separating fiction from reality and thinking of them like real life races. And I'll briefly share my thoughts on this. So, I'm sure some TTRPGs have had actual racist elements that are worth being called out, but for DC20 the stuff I've seen has been pretty ridiculous. This is a fake example, but I've seen a handful of people say stuff like, I know this dog is listed as an option for the Beastborn ancestry. This is problematic since dog has been used as a derogatory term against real life groups in the past. Not to mention the use of the word frog, despite frog commonly being used as a racist hate symbol of the modern era, and being associated with problematic figures such as Alex Jones. And right after frog, an elephant is mentioned as an example, yet no donkey. They're Republicans! Obviously that was an over-exaggeration, but whenever talk of racism gets to the point where you need to be a professional racist to know or discuss it, I don't see a point to it. The coach definitely didn't intend anything racist. They're called ancestries. They have nothing to do with real races. Literally every real person, if made in DC20 besides maybe Colonel Sanders, would be half human, half human. Just full human. I think different ancestries should basically be thought of like space aliens. It's cool for them to be different and odd. Gnomes can be smart. Dwarves can be good at crafting. Halflings and Giantborn can be less intelligent. However, if you don't like that, it's perfectly fine, because you can choose different options. If you want to be an intelligent Giantborn, just don't choose the intelligence attribute decrease expanded trait and you're good. I genuinely believe that the Minecraft Piglin Brute is conceptually more racist than anything that exists in DC20, so I hope the coach doesn't try too hard to correct what he has currently. Even small changes I'm iffy on. Like, would it matter if the word frog was replaced with toad? No, but it wouldn't matter, so why do it? Those were my thoughts, I'll hopefully not talk about that again. I prefer talking and thinking about cool stuff like wizards and Sasquatches, but I saw like 3 people talking about ancestry racism stuff, and after taking mystical psychic damage I felt like sharing my thoughts on it. Now onto ancestry traits. This is a weird thing to discuss since DC20 is going to have its own lore, but there are some ancestors that don't have options that I'd expect them to have. Elves I associate with being more magical, so it feels odd to me that there aren't any expanded traits related to magic. I at least would have expected mana increase to be an option for elves. And for halflings, there aren't any expanded traits related to luck. I know the coach is taking halflings in a new direction, but since every other TTRPG with halflings I can think of has them be lucky, it feels like a weird omission. I also would have expected halflings to have some kind of expanded trait that makes them better at hiding. It's cool that the coach is taking certain ancestries in new directions, but I also think the expanded trait section is a perfect place to put these more classic options, so if someone wants to play a more traditional lucky halfling then they can. And that's what I wanted to say about the ancestries. If I kept going, most of my feedback would probably just be, I want this, but more, which probably isn't the most valuable feedback. I also considered talking about the Beast Whisperer and Predict Weather minor traits, since they feel very unusual to me, but I'll let the coach cook. If I end up not liking the unique DC20 lore or whatever, I suppose I can just take the minor trait for my second ancestry anyway, so it's fine. Yeah, that's it.